Christ's deity. To be true to the Scriptures, we must reject all teachings that deny that Jesus Christ and God are equal. Here's Dr. Gene Getz.
In chapter 5 of the Gospel of John, we see this principle illustrated once again in a very, very unique way in relationship to this principle, and that is that Jesus Christ and God are equal. And we're just going to go right into that chapter because it's unique, and I've called this first setting the Pool of Bethesda because that's where it transpired. So let's take a look at John chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades. And within these lay a large number of the disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. For those of you who have been to Israel, and we've been there together, some of you, we've been at this very place where they definitely believe that they have discovered the Pool of Bethesda. By the way, John is the only author, as far as the New Testament is concerned, that makes reference to this pool. But this was a large, large pool. And some of you will also remember that when we've been there, we went into the Church of St. Anne. And that's a marvelous experience because of the acoustics, where we gather together and sing Amazing Grace or some other wonderful hymn or truth song, and to sing in harmony, just perfect acoustics in that church. But that church is built right next to what they believe was the Pool of Bethesda. And so Jesus has gone up for this Jewish festival. And basically, he finds this large group of people who have this superstition that an angel will come down and make the waters move, and if they can get into that water, that they'll be healed. We believe that that's a myth, but the fact is they believed it. And so Jesus appears on the scene, and he meets this disabled man. So here's what we read then, picking up with verse 5. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. Now keep in mind that this is the third sign or miracle that John has chosen to record. And it's very significant that it says that he was ill as a disabled man for 38 years. That's a long time. To not have walked, not be able to function. And I don't know if any of you have ever been in a bed where you can't get out of that bed for a week, maybe because of surgery. That happened to me when I was in junior high school, and I had my appendix removed, and back then they wouldn't let you move. Now they get you up the first day. But because my appendix almost broke, they kept me in a bed for 7 days. I couldn't get out. And I remember when I got out of that bed, fortunately the nurse was there because I fainted. I just simply, for lying in a bed for 7 days, I was so weak that she caught me as I was going down. And it was because of being sedentary for all that time. Here's a guy that has been sick and disabled for 38 years. Now, something marvelous is going to happen here. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized he had already been there a long time, and of course Jesus knew that because we know who Jesus Christ is, but in his humanness, when he noticed and realized he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "You want to get well?" Well, you can imagine how this man would respond in a human way because of the myth and because of what he believed. "Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, someone else goes down ahead of me. And that had happened probably month after month and perhaps year after year. And he really believed that. He believed that angels came down, caused the water to bubble, and he would be well. Well, it's interesting that we see the miracle take place. And against that backdrop of the myth, notice what happened. Get up, Jesus told him. Pick up your mat and walk. Now notice there's a very significant word. Instantly, the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. He didn't need the pool. He didn't need bubbling waters. He didn't need anyone to put him in the pool. In other words, when Jesus said, get up and walk, after 38 years, he got up and he started to walk. Now, this is a very significant miracle because of what happened after a man had been there or ill or disabled for 38 years. Now, notice the purpose. As I said, this is the third sign or miracle that John chose to help us believe that Jesus Christ is who he said he is. So let's just review again the purpose of John. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples. Many, many signs. In fact, you read through the Gospel of John or the other Gospels, Jesus worked many miracles in different places. And so John says there are many of those that are not written in this book, that is the book of John, but these are written. We've looked at 3 miracles. We've looked at 3 signs that were selected. Water to wine, which demonstrated that Jesus was really the master of quality. It was the best wine. We've seen that Jesus healed a boy who was sick about 20 miles away from where Jesus was, and he got well, master of distance. And here we see master of time. See, there's a reason why Jesus, or John, I should say, chose these miracles. These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Now again, I've reviewed the miracles. Let me just again state them because they're so significant. Let me give you just a little elaboration. The changing of water into wine. In this first miracle of his ministry, Jesus revealed himself as the master of quality by effecting instantaneously the change that the wine produces over a period of months or years. I sometimes like to say, and I don't know what wine would taste like that's aged for 1,000 years, but I assume it would be of the highest quality. So this miracle was chosen for a very specific reason. Now, the next miracle, elaborating the healing of the nobleman's son. By healing the boy who was more than 20 miles distance from him, Jesus showed himself the master of distance or space. And again, we can say this. 20 miles was a long way in that day. But you know something? That boy could have been 1,000 miles away. He could have been 1,000,000 miles away. He could have been many light years away. And Jesus could have done what he did because we read in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things that were created were made by him. This is the Lord of the universe that is working these miracles. And now we have this miracle recorded here in John chapter 5, the healing of the disabled man. The longer a disease afflicts a man, the more difficult it is to cure. Jesus, by curing instantly an affliction of 38 years standing, became the master of time. So you see why John selected these particular signs and miracles. Now, belief is developing in the disciples and in others, but unbelief is also developing among those who rejected him. And we see this, the Jewish unbelief, right here in John 5, in verse 9. Now that day was a Sabbath, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "This is the Sabbath. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat." He's walking with his mat. He replied, "The man who made me well told me, pick up your mat and walk." The man. He didn't know who Jesus was. Just a man. Who is this man who told you, pick up your mat and walk? By the way, they knew who it was, because this was not the first time Jesus had done this in Jerusalem, this kind of thing. But the man who was healed did not know who it was, because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Now here you see rejection. You see acceptance as a theme developing, but you also see rejection as a theme that is developing. And we see that happening. And so we have persecution in John 5:16-18. Therefore the Jews began persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. You see, to them, the Sabbath was more important than people. Jesus said on another occasion, "I am the Lord of the Sabbath." He said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, Jesus confronted this situation because the religious leaders were all concerned about a law, but had absolutely no compassion or concern for a human being. And you see this. You see it developing throughout the Gospel of John. So, Jesus responded to them, "My Father is still working, and I am working also." And they didn't like that, because they knew what was happening, what he was saying. This is why the Jews began trying all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. And we know he was equal to God, because he said, "I and the Father are one." So we have here this rejection developing, this unbelief, this deception. And it's interesting if you project ahead to a little epistle that John wrote after the church came into existence in 2 John verse 7. We read these words, "Many deceivers have gone out into the world. They do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh." What does that mean? God was in Christ. When Jesus came into this world, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Jesus Christ came in the flesh. Means he was one with God. That's the incarnation. That's what John is talking about. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. "If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your home, and don't greet him, for the one who greets him shares in his evil works." Now you have to understand that John is dealing with a cultural situation where the church would meet in homes. That's the only place they could meet. And basically what he is saying here is, you do not invite a deceiver, someone who denies the deity of Jesus Christ, into a teaching position where they are training and teaching other people. That's what he's talking about. House churches. He's not talking about the fact you can't invite somebody into your home who doesn't believe that Jesus is God and share with them. He's saying don't give them a platform for communication and teaching, because that's heresy and it's wrong. And so John later, years later, when he wrote his little epistle, he warned against people who literally teach that Jesus was just a human being, a wonderful human being, but he wasn't God in the flesh. So this leads us to a question, and that is, how many religious groups can you name that claim to be Christian and yet deny that Jesus Christ and God the Father are equal? Well, there are many religious groups that even claim to be Christian, but they do not believe that Jesus Christ is God. Most of your cults, most of your isms do not believe that Jesus Christ is God. And so we need to be aware of that. We need to have compassion for these people, but we must never give them a platform to communicate with other people heresy to communicate with other people that violate this principle. Here's that principle. To be true to the Scriptures, we must reject all teachings that deny that Jesus Christ and God are equal.